It's 10 o'clock. This is Sky News at 10. Our top story. 3 British aid workers are amongst 7 killed by Israel in Gaza. The UK demands an explanation as international condemnation grows. 2 of the 3 British victims are understood to be 57-year-old John Chapman and James Henderson, who was 33. With aid efforts now partly suspended, tonight Rishi Sunak has spoken to Benjamin Netanyahu, warning him the situation is becoming increasingly intolerable. Also tonight, she'd invited officers to arrest her, but Scottish police say they will take no action against J.K. Rowling over her comments about transgender people. A 12-year-old is arrested after a school shooting in Finland that leaves a fellow pupil dead and others seriously injured. Why Sweden has the highest gun crime death rate in Europe. Sky News has a special report. Plus, free childcare is offered for working parents of 2-year-olds in England, but there are serious questions over a lack of nursery places and staff. And we'll take a first look at tomorrow's front pages in our press preview from 10:30 right through to midnight. Good evening. The UK is demanding answers from Israel after 7 aid workers, including 3 Britons, were killed in Gaza. 2 of the 3 British victims are understood to be 57-year-old John Chapman and James Henderson, who was 33. The group working for the charity World Central Kitchen were killed when their convoy was hit in 3 separate strikes. Israel's military said the incident would be investigated independently, and tonight Rishi Sunak has spoken to Benjamin Netanyahu. World Central Kitchen and another charity have suspended operations inside Gaza, where famine looms and the humanitarian crisis worsens. Here's our Middle East correspondent, Alistair Bunkle.
The missile went straight through the roof of the armoured vehicle, shredding the charity's identifying logo, like a dart hitting a bullseye. Further down the road, the 2 other vehicles in the convoy were picked off, one by one. 3 precise hits on 3 separate cars. All 7 passengers were killed, among them 3 Britons, confirmed by World Central Kitchen and the British government.
Hey, this is Zomi and Chef Olivier. We're at the Dirabala kitchen.
Australian Zomi Frankham was also among the dead. Her Prime Minister has demanded answers.
Australia expects full accountability for the deaths of aid workers, which is completely unacceptable. Aid workers and those doing humanitarian work, and indeed all innocent civilians, need to be provided with protection.
Their bodies were taken to Al-Aqsa Hospital near Gaza City, where they were identified by colleagues. Israel has now admitted responsibility for the strikes and launched an investigation.
Unfortunately, in the last day, there was a tragic incident of an unintended strike of our forces on innocent people in the Gaza Strip. This happens in war. We're checking this thoroughly. We're in touch with the governments, and we'll do everything for this not to happen again.
The 7 aid workers were leaving the charity's warehouse in Deir al-Balah, where they had just unloaded 100 tons of aid. The 3-car convoy was travelling along this coast road, one of the main highways heading through the Strip. Sky News has geolocated the wreckages of the cars to these 3 locations.
As humanitarian workers, we're here trying to do our job, but we are continually being hampered every step of the way. If you put the pieces of the puzzle together, we're not getting enough aid in. We are unable to properly move throughout the Gaza Strip to get that aid that we do get in to the people that need it. And while we're doing that, we're at risk of being killed.
Devastated Palestinian colleagues comforted one another as the news reached them. World Central Kitchen gave out food to Israelis following the October the 7th attacks and has been one of the biggest providers of aid in Gaza during the war. But it has now suspended its operations following the airstrikes last night. And today, aid ships bound for Gaza were turned back to Cyprus. That will have an immediate impact on the thousands who desperately rely on their food.
Well, Alistair joins us now from Jerusalem, and our chief political correspondent, John Craig, is at the Foreign Office. But first, let's turn to Alistair. And Alistair, two of those three British victims named tonight, 57-year-old John Chapman and 33-year-old James Henderson. What more do we know about what actually happened and how?
Well, some information is coming out in Israeli media, although not yet confirmed by official sources. Officially, there is an investigation that's been launched to establish why this happened. I think what we can report pretty confidently as fact is that this convoy had left a World Central Kitchen warehouse near Deir al-Balah, and it was moving south to Rafah. They had coordinated that movement with the Israeli military, and that should have given them the safety, security and the cover in order to move. But they were fired upon, not once, but 3 times. And so I think when the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu describes this as an accident, a lot of people will say, how can it be an accident when a drone or a fighter jet has fired 3 missiles systematically and very precisely at 3 different vehicles of the same convoy that were spread quite far apart. The intent to attack the vehicles looks deliberate, but the question mark is why? Did they think incorrectly that there was Hamas fighters on board, or was it something else? But it does appear to be a breakdown at the very least of Israeli intelligence. So I guess the issue will then turn to what next and what consequences there will be. And that, in part, is in the hands of the United States, the United Kingdom and others to think about what to do. But it could have an effect on the ground. We've already seen, as I said in my report, World Central Kitchen suspending operations. There are not that many aid organisations, I can tell you, who are willing to deliver aid at the moment in Gaza. It is that dangerous. World Central Kitchen was one of the few, and they're now backing out, at least temporarily. It could create an almighty problem, not just for the people of Gaza, but for the Israeli military, who are the occupying force.
And to that point about what the international voices will have to say, John, to you at the Foreign Office, we know that Rishi Sunak has spoken to Benjamin Netanyahu this evening.
There have been 3 major developments here in Whitehall. The most high profile really is what seems like a very angry phone call from the Prime Minister Rishi Sunak to Benjamin Netanyahu, in which he said the situation was becoming intolerable. According to Number 10, the PM said he was appalled by the killing of these aid workers and in the airstrike. He's demanded what he called a thorough and transparent independent investigation into what happened. And then the PM said far too many aid workers and ordinary civilians have lost their lives in Gaza, and the situation is increasingly intolerable. The UK expects to see immediate action by Israel to end restrictions on humanitarian aid. Now, earlier, the Deputy Foreign Secretary, that's Andrew Mitchell, summoned the Israeli ambassador here to the Foreign Office, that's Sipi Hotoveli. He talked about the appalling killing of these aid workers, and he again called for an investigation, and he called, as the UK has, for a humanitarian pause to get aid in and then moving towards a sustainable ceasefire. Then the Foreign Secretary, Lord Cameron, interrupted an Easter holiday to have a phone call with Israel's Foreign Minister, that is Israel Katz. He talked about the completely unacceptable attack on these British nationals. And he again said Israel must urgently explain what happened, how this happened, and make major changes to ensure the safety of aid workers on the ground. The tone of the Prime Minister's words, pretty angry. We've not heard him use the word intolerable before, and we've heard from Lord Cameron talking about this being unacceptable. Clearly, the UK's patience with the Netanyahu regime is beginning to run out. Tonight at the United Nations, the UK has issued a call for a de-escalation of tension in the area. But this has been a dreadful tragedy. But what makes it so much worse, of course, is that it does look as though these aid workers were deliberately targeted and it wasn't an accident. That's why we've seen the Prime Minister say it's intolerable and the Foreign Secretary say it's unacceptable. Tomorrow, Lord Cameron heads for a NATO summit in Brussels. We can expect to hear a lot more about this dreadful incident then.
John, thank you. Scottish police will take no action in relation to social media posts by the author J.K. Rowling. She had challenged officers to arrest her as a test of the new Scottish law on hate crimes, which came into effect yesterday. Police said they'd received complaints about the Harry Potter author's comments after she called transgender women men, but the remarks were not assessed to be criminal. Ashna Horanag reports.
For a law that's meant to make it illegal to stir up hatred, right now it's just stirring up anger, as more people join one of Scotland's most famous residents by questioning its purpose. In the eyes of Police Scotland's J.K. Rowling's series of inflammatory tweets posted to provoke the new law into action are not criminal, much to the author's relief. Writing on X, she said, "I hope every woman in Scotland who wishes to speak up for the reality and importance of biological sex will be reassured by this announcement." But not broadcaster India Willoughby, one of those targeted in the tweets, and hardly a Rowling fan. She questions if this isn't a hate crime, then what is?
Finally, I'm just speaking from the heart here. Look, it's getting scary and it's just not on. It is really, really not on. The police need to buck their ideas up and start making prosecutions and protecting the trans community.
The SNP say this is what the law is meant to do, stamp out hate on the grounds of age, disability, religion, sexual orientation and transgender identity. But as protesters in Holyrood were keen to point out yesterday, there are blurred lines.
It would be an offence to incite hatred, to be abusive and threatening, stirring up hatred towards an individual, which would cause them fear and alarm. If you were just saying that in your house or on your social media, I'm not going to be saying what the Police Scotland would say, but that's your expression, your freedom of expression, which is respected within this bill.
Legislation is meant to be black and white, but right now it's anything but, as questions hang over who it's protecting and what it's provoking. Ashna Horanag, Sky News.
A 12-year-old boy has been detained in Finland, suspected of a school shooting in which 3 fellow 12-year-old pupils were shot and one of them killed. It happened in a suburb of the capital, Helsinki, this morning. The suspect is understood to have used a handgun owned by a relative. Rachel Venables has more.
They waited by the school gates, parents desperate for news, after a student brought a gun into the school this morning and started firing. 3 children aged 12 were shot. 1 did not survive.
One of the victims died almost immediately at this location in the school, and 2 other victims were transported to the hospital in Helsinki.
The attack happened here at the Virtola school in Vantaa, north of Helsinki. The suspect, also 12 years old, was later arrested in the capital. Police say he was still holding the handgun, which was owned by a family member.
Well, this is a terrible thing that had happened, and we are all very, very strongly sad and shocked. I really don't see any need for guns or handguns in Finland.
Gun legislation was tightened in Finland after 2 devastating school shootings in 2007 and 2008, in which 15 students and 3 members of staff were killed. But gun ownership's still high in a country where target shooting and hunting is popular. It's thought there are more than 1.5 million licensed firearms, amongst a population of just 5.6 million people. As the police investigation works to uncover what happened here and why, the Nordic nation will no doubt be re-evaluating its relationship with guns, all too aware that a family sent their child to school this morning for them to never come home. Rachel Venables, Sky News.
Sweden's gun crime death rate is now the highest in the European Union, and about 62,000 people are linked to criminal networks in the country. Police say children as young as 13 are being armed to take part in the country's gang warfare. Our Europe correspondent Siobhan Robbins has this special report.
In Sweden, police have seized a lethal stash. This is just a small sample of the deadly arsenal taken off the streets.
We have automatic weapons, we have semi-automatic weapons, we have 3D weapons.
Weapons from former wars are among those used by gangs in their urban battle. A battle where children become killers.
How young could someone be who's using this in a gang?
We're talking about very, very young people who could be 13, 14, 15 years old.
Sweden is now the gun murder capital of the EU. 53 fatal shootings were recorded last year. Years of failed integration make isolated young men from migrant backgrounds especially vulnerable to recruitment.
I've seen people getting shot, I've seen people die, people getting hurt, mothers crying in despair. I've seen almost everything, but there's nothing you can do about it.
By age 9, Adam was already moving drugs for gangs. His name and voice have been changed.
Before, if you were going to kill someone, you got 1 million kroner, around 75 grand. But now the prices are so low that everyone kills.
And gangs have become more brazen, taking down targets in public. A security guard was shot in this busy gym when a teenager missed his mark.
Sweden has totally failed with integration.
Police Superintendent Daniel Larsson agrees failed integration can feed the gangs. But on patrol in Uppsala, he says it's feuds fueling the violence.
We have murders, we have shootings, we have hand grenades attack, we have homemade bombs.
The gang wars peaked in September when someone planted a bomb at a rival's relative's house. They were out, but an innocent neighbour was killed. Daniel shows us what's left.
Wow. So the dynamite was placed here?
Yeah, between the both houses.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah,
and it's just decimated.
Yeah,
it.
a big blast.
2 properties were destroyed. More than 50 others were damaged.
People were afraid, people was crying. So it was a sort of a war scene, actually.
Do you feel like Sweden is a bit at war with the gangs?
Yes. A low impact war.
Who's winning?
We.
Do you think the gangs think that?
No. But we are a bigger gang.
My father still comes here every day. His mission is that his candle doesn't burn out.
But a growing number of innocent victims are being caught in the spiralling violence. Frida's brother Musa was murdered when he was 19. He had no links to gangs. One of his killers was just 15.
How can you continue to live with the fact that you have another person's blood on your hands? You took their life. You shattered their families.
The government's giving police more powers and looking at tougher sentences as part of its plan to beat the gangs and bring peace back to Sweden's streets. Siobhan Robbins, Sky News, Sweden.
An 80-year-old man wanted for almost 3 decades has appeared in court after he was arrested at Heathrow Airport. Richard Burrows was arrested on Thursday after returning from Thailand. Cheshire Police said he'd been wanted since December 1997, when he failed to attend Chester Crown Court to face trial for 2 counts of a serious sexual offence and 11 counts of indecent assault. Police say 3 suspects believed to be involved in the stabbing of an Iranian journalist fled the UK within hours of the attack. Iran International's Pouria Zirati was stabbed outside his home in Wimbledon last week. Detectives say the suspects travelled directly to Heathrow Airport after fleeing the scene and abandoning their car. Shop price inflation fell below 2% in March for the first time since December 2021. The British Retail Consortium says shoppers are still paying 1.3% more in March than a year ago, but that's down from 2.5% in February. Food inflation also eased to 3.7%. At least 29 people have been killed in a fire at a nightclub in Istanbul. It broke out in the basement of a tower block which had been undergoing renovations. 6 people have been arrested. Our Europe correspondent Adam Parsons reports.
Flames pouring out of a high-rise building in Istanbul in the middle of the day. On the ground level, people run for safety as smoke billows up from the basement, home to a well-known nightclub. It had been undergoing renovation work. The blackened corner of the building witnessed to the effects of this deadly blaze. Emergency services filled the surrounding streets, evacuating residents and also construction workers. Most of the dead are thought to be their colleagues who'd been working on the building. The flames ripped through the 2 floors of the Masquerade nightclub just before 1 in the afternoon. It's thought the fire started in there. This club now an acrid shell.
This is one of Istanbul's best-known nightclubs. It's got a capacity of about 1,500 people. It hosts really big-name DJs and live acts, not only from Turkey but from around the world. It's the kind of place where you have kind of VIP tables, table service. You know, it is not a kind of backstreet basement nightclub, as you might think. It's a really famous venue here in Istanbul.
The cause of the blaze is unclear. But the city's mayor says the work should not have been going ahead, saying the club did not have the right construction permit. 6 people, including members of the club management, have now been detained for questioning. A famous venue, now the scene of an infamous fire. Adam Parsons, Sky News.
Ahead of the expected general election, it's clear politicians on all sides see affordable childcare as a key campaigning issue. Today, the Prime Minister was keen to sell his policy that working parents of 2-year-olds in England are now eligible for 15 hours of childcare a week during school term times. But there are questions about the number of staff and spaces available as demand rises and childcare bills increase. Becky Cottrell reports.
And you all might need a bath tonight.
This nursery in Nottingham, like so many others, hasn't been able to keep up with a soaring demand for places as more children have qualified for free childcare.
We had an influx of phone calls, can we come for a show around, and all the places have gone in that room now. We can't accept any more children, and we're having a lot of frustrated parents ring in saying that they can't find a space for their child.
Previously, only 3- and 4-year-olds in England received government-funded care if their parents earned less than £100,000 a year. But from this week, 2-year-old children are now eligible for 15 hours of free childcare a week. From September, this scheme will be extended to children as young as 9 months. And as of September next year, all under 5s will be entitled to 30 hours of free care. For Good Foundation's day nursery, the government's announcement has come as a financial blow. Although they're oversubscribed amongst older children, they're looking after fewer younger kids, as parents with babies have decided to hold off enrolling them until September, when they'll get some free childcare.
We're trying to do our bit and keep our fees down, but at this rate, we're going to have to put them up because I can't afford utility bills, I can't afford the resources, and the staff wages, they've just gone up with the tax year, so where am I getting all this money from?
The Prime Minister wouldn't confirm that everyone who wants to take advantage of the support will be able to find a place for their child.
We fully funded the programme and increased the rates that we're paying to nurseries, making sure that there are more childcare places available, more childcare staff available, and the future looks bright. And this is a really positive intervention, which, when it's fully rolled out, will be worth around £7,000 worth of support to working parents.
Some of these parents weren't convinced by what Rishi Sunak had to say.
The fear is that we'll lose another nursery in the town because the system isn't
doesn't feel, or that certainly the information is coming out, that doesn't feel like the system is got the foundations right.
Alex Thompson has 2 children. Her youngest now qualifies for 15 free hours a week, but it's not enough. And she's had to turn down a job as a teacher in order to be home to look after her daughter.
I don't think 15 hours a week is enough for working parents. I think there's no incentive for parents to go back to work after having children. There's very little support. I mean, for people like myself who don't really have a network support, you know, family who live close or family who have working families. I don't have that help or luxury to work, so I'm reliant on the scheme.
Labour won't commit to expanding free hours, saying the government has made a pledge without a plan. But the cost and availability of childcare is one of the biggest issues facing families, many still struggling to make ends meet. And plenty fear that without a more extreme intervention in the industry, these are promises the politicians can't keep. Becky Cottrell, Sky News, Nottingham.
Well, that was Sky News at 10. Coming up, we'll take a first look at tomorrow's newspapers in the press preview. Tonight, we're joined by the editor of the Jewish Chronicle, Jake Wallace-Simons, and the Observer's chief leader writer, Sonia Soda. Amongst the stories we'll be discussing, this on the front of the Eye. Its headline, UK demands answers after Israeli strike kills 7 aid workers. We'll be right back. Do stay with us. Welcome back. You're watching Sky News. In just a moment, the press preview. A first look at what's on the front pages as they arrive. But first, our top stories. 3 British citizens are amongst 7 people killed in an Israeli strike on an aid convoy in Gaza. The Prime Minister tells Netanyahu that the deaths are appalling. Police in Scotland say they're not treating comments made online by J.K. Rowling as criminal after the author challenged the country's new hate crime law by calling transgender women men. A 12-year-old has been arrested after a school shooting in Finland that leaves a fellow pupil dead and others seriously injured. You are watching the press preview, a first look at what's on the front pages as they arrive. It's time to see what's making the headlines with the editor of the Jewish Chronicle, Jake Wallace-Simons, and the Observer's chief leader writer, Sonia Soda. They'll be with us from now until just before midnight. So let's see what's on some of those front pages for you now. The Eye leads with demands from the UK for answers from Israel over the 7 aid workers, 3 of them British, killed by an Israeli airstrike in Gaza. 3 Britons killed on Gaza mercy mission. That's the front of the Daily Express. The Telegraph too says that Rishi Sunak has told Israel that he's appalled by the deaths and described the situation in Gaza as intolerable. The Guardian says charities have suspended aid operations in Gaza as a result of the killings. The Financial Times says there are doubts over the speed of the shift towards electric vehicles as sales for Tesla and their Chinese rivals, BYD, have slowed. The Metro has a story concerning an embarrassing misunderstanding over an auction. And the Star heralds the arrival of telltale fridges that can reveal who scoffed their last piece of pie. I think I could invest in one of those. And a reminder that by scanning the QR code you'll see on screen during the programme, you can check out the front pages of tomorrow's newspapers while you watch us. And we are joined tonight by Jake Wallace-Simons and Sonia Soda. Welcome to both of you. I mean, we start with this horrific story, front page of the Daily Express, and others, the 3 Britons killed on what they describe as their mercy mission in Gaza, the aid workers, 2 of which have been named this evening. Sonia.
Yeah, it's just a terribly tragic story. So this was a convoy of 3 vehicles. They were carrying food in Gaza and they were hit by Israel. And I think there are huge questions facing Israel tonight. The Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has come out and, offered condolences, but no explanation as of yet. And I think the questions are, these were, it was a clearly marked convoy. It was marked with the name of the charity, of the aid organisation at the top. The people travelling in the convoy were wearing, badges to say that they were humanitarian aid workers. So the question is, how could this have happened? How could aid workers have been hit? And this is going to have all sorts of consequences because, first of all, there's the absolute tragic loss of life. 3 British citizens, an Australian citizen, a Polish citizen, number among them. And that's why we've seen world leaders come out and say, Israel needs to be held accountable for this, essentially. But also this will have ramifications for, Gaza's already in an absolutely terrible state in terms of the humanitarian conditions. You've got lots of officials warning about the fact that, Gaza is effectively on the point of famine. There isn't enough aid going in. And this is leading to, there aren't that many aid organisations still operative in Gaza, as we heard your correspondent talking about in the 10 o'clock bulletin. And this has led to aid organisations saying that they've got no choice but to withdraw for the moment in order to keep their workers safe. So there's going to be knock-on consequences for, taking an already terrible situation in Gaza, making it worse.
And Jake, the question has to be, how could this have happened? We know that aid agencies have their movements coordinated by the Israeli army, so they know where they are at all times. We are told that it's a mistake. The evidence some suggesting pointing otherwise.
Well, look, I mean, these were three very brave people doing some vital work. There were three, the British victims were three former soldiers, one former Royal Marine, a former Special Forces hero and an Army veteran. And it does seem as if this wasn't a stray shot because they were targeted more than once and there were more than one car in the convoy. So there were pinpoint strikes that took them out. So it does point to more of a failure of intelligence. I mean, it's inconceivable that the Israeli army would have intentionally targeted an aid convoy when it could have been targeting Hamas. I mean, there's no way, to my mind, that would have happened. But the Israeli intelligence has got this formidable reputation with good reason. It's been impressive over the past 7.5 decades, carrying out audacious feats that people would have thought is impossible. But it has failed a lot, in particular on October the 7th as well, which was a huge failure of Israeli intelligence not seeing this thing coming. And this does seem, I mean, on the face of it, no one knows, and the investigation hasn't really begun yet properly. But it does seem as if it would be a failure of intelligence rather than anything else.
And Sonia, as you were alluding to, charities now suspending their work after losing so many in this type of, targeted attack, it seems.
Well, as you said, Gillian, because it's hard to understand how, what kind of intelligence failure could have led to this, really, because as you said, there are established protocols in war zones in order to keep humanitarian workers safe, because if you start to encroach on the code that humanitarian workers can't go in and deliver aid in an area without organisations, fearing actually not just that their workers may be caught up in bombing raids, for example, but actually may be targeted. If you can't keep that principle sacrosanct, then that really undermines the notion of neutral humanitarian aid going in to help very, very desperate people, innocent people who are living in, what is a total war zone. The question is, those protocols will have been followed, these vehicles were marked. I think there has been some suggestion from Israel today, hasn't there, that they thought that this convoy may have been, there may have been someone from Hamas kind of travelling with it, but that clearly wasn't the case. And so I think there are questions, even if there was a terrorist who had been travelling with this, why were they still knowingly targeting an aid convoy?
Well, I think it's important not to get too ahead of ourselves because, I mean, we assumed that the protocols were being followed. They weren't necessarily being followed. They might have mistakenly departed from them, gone too late, gone too early. There could have been an intelligence mix-up in terms of another convoy that was nearby that was a terrorist convoy that they got mixed up. There's so many possibilities that will all hopefully come out in the investigation. I think we need to wait for that, but it's really important this investigation happens thoroughly and quickly and does get to the bottom of what actually went on here and ideally leads to a change in protocols to make sure that this never happens again, because it's tragic whichever way you look at it. There's no good outcome for anybody here. It's absolutely horrendous. But I mean, the one thing I would add as well, though, is that it's really easy to focus in on the British victims because they're familiar to us, because they're from our own country. But let's not forget the other victims as well.
No, we have said that there were seven
as well.
We've heard from Australia,
of course, but I also mean the innocent Palestinian victims and Israeli victims as well.
Yeah. Just wondered what you both made of the tone from Netanyahu, because he has said that, this shouldn't happen again, but also quoted as saying it happens in war.
Well, I think that was a really ill-advised thing to say, actually, because it sounds like an excuse, doesn't it? Or it sounds like something that, you can't avoid some of these mistakes. It feels like that there's that sort of implication there, and it's completely and utterly unacceptable. He should not have said that, because this shouldn't happen in war. There are things to prevent humanitarian aid workers being targeted, suffering this kind of awful death. There are things in place to prevent that. So it shouldn't happen in war.
I agree.
Do you think he got the tone wrong?
Well, I think that it was clumsily phrased, but I think I know what he was trying to say. I mean, last year, 62 aid workers were killed in warfare around the world, and so it does happen, but saying this sort of thing just happens does sound a bit flippant and throwaway. You're right, it shouldn't happen, particularly when you're talking about an advanced army with precision munitions and highly developed intelligence. It shouldn't happen. And I think that he could have phrased it more sensitively and showed a bit more. He was contrite. He could have showed more contrition in terms of the messaging. But I think that the point he was making is one that one can relate to, which is that there seems to be a sense when people observe warfare these days, who haven't experienced it themselves, that you can somehow avoid all civilian casualties altogether, that you can avoid any kind of errors, any mistakes, any mistaken actions by soldiers. And you just can't, because war is always hellish. And the average ratio of combatants to civilians around the world, according to the UN, is 1 to 9. So Israel's doing much better than the average. But civilian casualties cannot be avoided. This, however, should be.
Sonny, to the eye and the international voices, that headline there saying the UK demands answers after the strike. And we know that Rishi Sunak has spoken with Benjamin Netanyahu this evening. He's described the event as intolerable.
Well, I think in the wake of this, you're going to see... You've already seen a toughening up in tone, actually, from Israel's key allies, including here in the UK, including from the US. And I think what you're seeing is a further hardening in tone, as you would expect after, international aid workers have been killed. And I think it is important to say, this isn't... It's not like they were caught up in some bombing raid. They were, this convoy was targeted, which I think is...
Sure,
I don't think anyone... I think lots of people would acknowledge that, civilians lose their lives in war, and that is incredibly tragic. But this was a targeting of this convoy.
Sure, but they weren't targeted because they were humanitarian aid workers. They were not. I mean, I think it's impossible. I mean, the only thing I could conceive of is if some rogue person targeted them out of some kind of weird grip of some criminality. But I think that's very, very unlikely indeed. It's certainly not the case that Israel, as a state, would have said, right, let's go and target humanitarian aid workers. It was an error, it was a mistake, it was a tragic error. The Prime Minister of Israel has acknowledged that and apologised for it and expressed great regret and launched an investigation. We have to wait and see what the results of that is, but it seems to me that the indications point to some kind of grave intelligence.
And do you think it's a possibility that they were not identified as humanitarian aid workers,
I don't know.
even though the vehicles were clearly marked?
I don't know. I don't want to speculate. But I'm pretty confident in saying that I'm almost certain to say that this wouldn't be anything intentional at all. The Prime Minister said that already. It's some kind of awful, grave error.
And what's your assessment of the relationship, the international relationships now?
Yeah, so, I mean, just to come back to that, so I do think... So clearly there's... going to be massive implications in terms of the delivery of aid into Gaza. But I think actually for Israel as well, there has been an ebbing away of support for Israel and Israel's military action, I think, as people have seen the profound humanitarian consequences in Gaza. And I think world leaders knew initially when they supported Israel's right to defend itself, as Jake said, there's no such thing as a clean war. There was always tragic innocent civilian loss of life in war. But I think the scale of what we've seen in Gaza has been very difficult to comprehend. And I think, whether this was an error, whether something else went wrong, whatever it was, this is going to, I think, lead to a further undermining of support for Israel. And I think it's going to have ramifications for Israel's standing in the international community, as well as kind of for the people of Gaza.
We know from the reports, speaking to our political correspondent, John Craig, that the conversation between Rishi Sunak and Benjamin Netanyahu was terse, to say the very, very least. Do you think that this incident in particular will be a turning point in terms of how the international community deals with Netanyahu and Israel?
I don't think so. I mean, obviously, this is, as we've agreed, is an awful moment in the war. But I think that overall, the picture, and it will ratchet up pressure on Israel from different quarters, but I think overall the position remains the same. I mean, the US... President Biden is making quite aggressive noises towards Israel, rhetorically, and at the UN Security Council last week as well. But that isn't matched in terms of his policy. Last week, billions of pounds worth of bombs and fighter jets were sent to Israel by the US, including 500-pound bombs and 1,800 2,000-pound bombs and some F-15s as well, F-35, sorry.
But do you think the fact that one of the victims is a US-Canadian national?
Look,
it's
a diplomatic. A lot of diplomatic tension will follow. We saw the Israeli ambassador being summoned in Britain, and I imagine a similar thing will happen in the United States as well. But I think that hopefully the investigation will prove what went wrong, and there'll be some changes made to make sure this never happens again, and that hopefully should calm the troubled waters.
Okay. But I think that there is also a concern, though, a growing concern in the international community that that Israel's military objective, as stated, isn't achievable, and that actually in Netanyahu, you've got a prime minister who, he's got his own political interests that he's thinking about, and it's in his political interests in some ways to extend this conflict because there is accountability that he will face in Israel for that massively gross intelligence failure around October the 7th. So I think there is a concern that actually how well thought through is Israel's action now?
I'm not sure I would say that. I mean, I've heard that theory, and I've heard it a lot, but I think that it's important to recognise that in Israel there's no commander-in-chief like there is in America, where Joe Biden calls the shots in terms of military action overseas. In Israel there's a war cabinet, and so Netanyahu doesn't have the power himself to extend the war, even if he was that evil to want to extend the war for his own political gain. It would be difficult to get that past the chief of staff and the various other war cabinet members and to actually implement that as a policy. I see what you're saying, but I think it's a bit far-fetched.
OK. Jake and Sonia for the moment, thank you. We're going to take a break. Coming up, Scottish police say J.K. Rowling won't be charged over her social media posts concerning transgender people. We'll be discussing that next. Do stay with us.
I'm Martha Kellner and I'm Sky's US correspondent based here in Los Angeles. We aim to be the best and the most trusted place for news.
I'm Martin Brunt and I'm Sky's crime correspondent. We take you to the heart of the stories that shape our world.
I'm Helen Ann Smith. I'm Sky's Asia correspondent and I'm based here in Beijing.
We help you understand the world with us. I'm Neville Lazarus and I'm Sky's reporter based in Delhi.
welcome back. You are watching the press preview, still with me, Jake Wallace-Simons and Sonia Soda. This section, we're going to have a look at the Metro and this story concerning... Well, the story isn't entirely concerning J.K. Rowling, but she's figuring quite prominently in it. She's not going to face any action under Scotland's new hate crime law. Put that into context, Sonia.
So this relates to the new hate crime laws in Scotland that came into force on the 1st of April. The thing that's most controversial about them, so they do some uncontroversial stuff, which is drawing together existing legislation as applies to when you commit a crime against someone, if it's aggravated by hate for, you know, their age or their disability or whether they're gay or trans, then you will get a higher sentence. The controversial bit of the legislation is this relates to something called a stirring up offence, so stirring up hatred. We've long had a crime in this country that refers to racial hatred for very good reasons since the 1980s because of the existence of the National Front and other far-right political organisations. So new laws were introduced in the 80s. Now, what Scotland has done is extended those laws to a wide range of other categories, some of which, you know, already exist, but some of which apply to categories that are the subject of very live contested debate, including trans identity. And what the law what the law says is that if you can be accused of, you know, stirring up hatred against somebody, you know, because they are, say, trans, you know, on the face of it, that seems fine. The issue is that it's a very contested debate. There are lots of different views about whether gender identity can replace sex in society or not, about how you balance the rights of trans people with the necessary protections for female-only sport, for female-only single services. And there's a lot in this debate of people saying that people are hateful as a way of shutting down the debate. So vexatious claims of that people are transphobic or hateful, and you've had judges find that. This law also gives the police a lot of powers to determine what might be prosecutable or not. So it's hugely controversial. Lots of people are worried about the chilling impacts of free speech in this debate. And so J.K. Rowling, she waded into the debate and essentially dared the Scottish police to arrest her. And they've said, no, what she said it didn't reach the threshold of criminality. It means it's not criminal to say, you know, if somebody is a trans woman, you know, you can say they're male, you can say that you believe that they're a man. What she's done really is sort of she's tested the parameters of the law.
Testing the law. So, Jake, in essence, what she did was post on social media that a number of transgender women were men.
Yeah, I mean, she provided an immediate test case online to this new law by apparently infringing it in full view of her however many million followers that she has and challenging the police to arrest her as a response. And not only that, but she said that her motivation was to show other women that those who wanted to speak up for the reality of biological sex will be reassured by her actions. And also she pledged that if anybody else was prosecuted by the police for calling, as she calls it, a man, she would repeat the same charges and so therefore be charged herself by the police as a gesture of solidarity. So quite a brave move by J.K. Rowling, and it was the police who blinked first, didn't bring any charges against her, backed down, giving the reassurance that she wanted to other women that they can also speak their mind without fear of being prosecuted.
Although the police admit that they did receive complaints, but they hadn't passed the threshold.
This is a concern, isn't it? Because actually I don't think the law would put her on the wrong side of criminality, but what it might lead to is lots of complaints that go into the police. That might take up a lot of police time. The police may get it wrong. The police have got it wrong in England and Wales. The courts have ruled they've behaved unlawfully in relation to this debate by giving people warnings when they're actually, you know, expressing perfectly legitimate lawful perspectives. So the risk is actually that the process becomes a punishment. You get reported to the police, there might be an investigation. There's also this thing called non-crime hate incidents, which the police record, and this may be recorded as that might go on your record. So there's all sorts of things to be concerned about, even if this doesn't cross the threshold of criminality.
This is the first test of the new law. We've just got time, Jake, to have a look at this story on page 2 of the Metro. Rishi Sunak being asked the question he's been asked many, many times before, but responded with a nervous laugh, it seems.
That's right. He was asked when the country's going to be going to the polls, and he laughed. And when asked why he laughed, he said, because I've answered this so many times before. But to my knowledge, he hasn't. I mean, I don't know what the date is. I'm sure the viewers don't know what the date is going to be. I mean, to me, he was probably laughing because he wasn't able to cry on air.
Why is that funny, the presenter said. Why are you laughing about that? He said he'd been chuckling because there's a way that we'd announce the general election. It would be done in the formal and official way.
It wouldn't be done on the air, local radio station.
No. Jake and Sonia, thank you very much for the moment. See you in the next hour.
Warm memories wherever you go. The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
There'll be showers or longer spells of rain this week, with unseasonably strong winds expected over the weekend. Wednesday will start largely dry in the south, if rather murky in places, but there'll be rain for the north. Southern and eastern Scotland will stay cloudy and wet through the morning, whereas Northern Ireland and northern England will turn more showery.
The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Coming up next on Sky News at 11, the government demands answers from Israel after 3 British aid workers are amongst 7 killed in Gaza.